Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thanks for being with us. After 11 years, the City of Cleveland and the U.S. Department of Justice are seeking to end the city's police oversight agreement with the federal government, better known as the Cleveland Police Consent Decree. It was put in place in 2015 following a federal investigation that found widespread unconstitutional policing, including use of excessive force. Mayor Justin Bibb said in a press conference Thursday, quote, "In no way are we declaring mission accomplished." But he and the federal government agree that Cleveland has made the necessary reforms and it's time to take back local control of reforming the police department. In 2021, voters overwhelmingly approved shifting control of police discipline and policies into civilian hands, which restructured the 13-member Community Police Commission that was created as part of the consent decree. Some community members, including those who led the charge for more civilian police oversight in 2021, have spoken out against ending the consent decree, pointing to the fact that residents weren't consulted in the decision. LaTanya Goldsby, president of Citizens for a Safer Cleveland and Cleveland's Black Lives Matter chapter, told IdeaStream's Cleveland government reporter Abby Marshall that progress in police reform is not being felt in the community. U.S. District Judge Solomon Oliver Jr., who oversees the decree, will be the one to approve or deny this termination request. Today, we'll hear from city and police leadership, as well as a community member who is against the ending of the consent decree. We also have our reporter with us here from IdeaStream Public Media. We'll introduce our guests now. Joining us in studio, we have Cleveland Chief of Police Annie Todd. Chief Todd, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We also have Dr. Lee Anderson, Executive Director of the Mayor's Police Accountability Team. Dr. Anderson, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We have Sharina Zayed with us, a member of the Cleveland Community Police Commission. Sharina, thanks for being part of the show.
Thank you for having me.
And our criminal justice reporter, Matthew Richmond, who's been covering the consent decree for many years, joins us now. Matt, thanks for being with us.
Morning. Great to be here.
Now, if you want to be a part of the show, you can give us a call if you have a comment or a question. That number is 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org or message us on Instagram. We're at The Sound of Ideas. As we start the conversation here, Chief Todd, the city and the Department of Justice feel that Cleveland has made the necessary reforms, even though an independent federal monitor tasked with judging the police department says many of the goals set in 2015 have not been met. So why end the decree now?
So when we look at the core makeup of the consent decree, that's about the constitutional policing and the use of force. That was the biggest part of the complaint back in 2014-15. We look at the changes that were made internally to the division, the policies that were changed, the training that's been implemented. And in the last year, we've undergone 7 assessments through the monitoring team. And those assessments included those key factors of the consent decree. And we find that we are doing constitutional policing and the training and policies are working.
Let's talk about the timing of this. Matt, to bring you into the conversation, other cities have recently ended decade-long agreements for federal oversight of their police. Seattle and New Orleans come to mind. Now, this Cleveland police consent decree started when Barack Obama was president in 2015, continued under President Donald Trump's first term, through President Joe Biden's presidency, and now into President Trump's second term. Now, President Trump has embraced ending these federal oversight agreements, pledging to remove what he called, quote, political handcuffs that make aggressively enforcing the law impossible. Is there a concern that this is being done now because it's what the president wants?
I think so. Yeah, I think you saw there was a hearing in court last week right after this motion to end the consent decree was filed. And at the end of it, an attorney for the Justice Department stood up and said to the judge, this isn't about a policy coming from D.C. I'm a career attorney with the Justice Department. This is because of, our legal opinion about the consent decree. And the judge kind of didn't entirely agree with that idea. Judge Solomon Oliver brought up the fact that the monitor had just been in court and just presented a plan for assessing the police progress during 2026 and then an idea of what they would do in 2027. And there was a lot in that plan. And so the judge said, it had been before there were some changes in the U.S. Attorney's Office and who was handling this case. the Justice Department and the Monitoring Team have been in agreement about where things stood. And now there is a big change. And to say that that has nothing to do with policy coming from DC is sort of hard to believe.
Chief Todd, what do you think about that?
So I hear what you're saying. On the political side, I'm not going to speak on that factor. I can just tell you about the changes that have been made. You know, our men and women are doing great work out there. You know, we have a system in place not only to make sure that they're doing what they're doing correctly, but also the accountability. And that's the strongest portion. We're not going to be perfect. And we don't claim that every action is going to be perfect. But it's about the accountability structures that are in place to address anything that could potentially be out of policy, that we have clear transparency to the community, and that we are doing the right thing. Most of our members have been trained only under the consent decree. So when you look at that, that's all they know. You know, the work under the consent decree, the policies that were created under the consent decree, and the work they're doing is, you know, been justified through the assessments.
Can you tell us, Chief Todd, you may not have the numbers at the top of your head, but how many members have come into service during the consent decree and how many predate the consent decree?
So when you look at our staffing, you know, when you talk about the last 10, 11 years of staffing, you know, we have a good majority, especially of our frontline officers. When you go through a police district, a lot of the seasoned officers have either retired, moved on, some of them are in specialized units, but the core patrol functions are all newer officers.
Now, Lee, you've said that the consent decree has limitations on how to measure goals like bias-free policing. How so?
Sure. So one of the things that I think is important is that bias-free policing is a very important concept that needs to be embedded into policies and training and also practices. And we've seen evidence of that. So all of our policies and training started with bias-free policing concepts, and making sure that officers were definitely trained on those concepts. So I think that it is a way for us to really look at not just how things can be measured sort of quantitatively, but also we want to look at the qualitative measures that have been ingrained in the practices of the trainings.
And how is the consent decree, which you've said doesn't have a strong ability to measure bias-free policing, how is the consent decree falling short in that regard?
Sure. So I think I'll move away a little bit from the portion of bias-free policing, because there are other elements such as community engagement, community and problem-oriented policing, which we are looking forward to also getting assessed and doing that locally. And so one of the things that we need to make that happen is actually community engagement and making sure that officers also understand, right, that bias-free policing is ingrained in what they're already doing.
Okay. And just one follow-up question for you on there. If the consent decree is not doing a good job of measuring whether bias-free policing is actually happening, do you have an idea of how that could be measured well so that we could actually see if that is being successful?
Yes. And so let me say this, the concept of bias-free policing, we had a search and seizure report that came out that was by the Federal Monitor. And what they noted was that there weren't any disparities in the policing, right? So there were differences in numbers, but not disparities. And so what we see there is that you see bias-free policing coming through the search and seizure, the protection of people's rights. And so I intend to continue to study that. We have reached out to a number of community partners as well as higher education institutions, as well as the Department of Justice, actually, their COPS office, to get funding to be able to make sure that we continue on with these practices just at a local level.
Sharina, to bring you into the conversation now, as a member of the Cleveland Community Police Commission, how do you feel about the request to end the federal oversight of the Cleveland Police?
I feel that
Do you agree with the
I
request?
don't agree with it. I can't say I'm surprised given the current federal administration and the broader national conversation on civil rights enforcement and those rights being taken away for a lot of people. And this was something many of us anticipated, but regardless of the politics, I believe that the real question for Cleveland is whether the work has truly been completed. Is it sustainable? And is it driven by real evidence or and the residents of the city of Cleveland? What say did they have on this decision? And is it just timing? You know, we need to focus on what the residents want and not just the timing of, is this convenient?
We're talking about this because there was something filed in court last Thursday, between the city and the Department of Justice seeking to end the consent decree. If you want to be a part of this conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org. Now, Matt, after that was filed last week on Thursday, there was a hearing on Friday. You mentioned that you were in the courtroom. Is there anything of note that you can share with us of what happened?
Well, like I mentioned, because it was a filing by the Department of Justice and the city, and they kind of laid out their arguments there. The judge just, focused on the monitor's take on kind of where the city is, and the monitor said basically that we had all these things planned. We had a lot of work planned for this year and the next, and that is still undone. And included in that is assessments of the accountability, the police disciplinary system, of supervision, and there were several more that I can't pull off the top of my head at the moment. But there was, 2 years of work that they were looking at of assessing the department's progress. And I think the judge, interestingly, said, he didn't see this coming. He didn't have sort of time to think about what the process should be now. He said that it's possible that he might want to get some input from some of the other people that were kind of involved in the creation of the consent decree 10 years ago. And, he talked a little bit about how there hasn't been, part of the consent decree said that every two years there should be a community survey. And there hasn't been one of those done since 2018. And the reason why it was skipped in 2020 was 2020 was not a good year to kind of get a snapshot of public opinion of the police. And then there was then there was COVID. And so there were reasons why it was delayed, but, he did specifically bring that up. It's like, how come we haven't done one of those? So I think in general, he was thinking a lot about whether, the community had just sort of been prepared for this happening right now.
Chief Todd, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to some of the questions that we have heard the judge said, and then also Sharina's concerns.
So there's a couple different ways that I think about that. When we talk to local media, I'll say that for an example, when these assessments come down and we sit there and we have these conversations about why is the city still under consent decree, and how much longer and what makes that determination. I don't know that I feel that it was as big of a surprise as some people are saying. This is something that we've been asked on several occasions. Why are you still under consent decree? You are receiving reports that are saying that you're doing constitutional policing. You've gone through these assessments related to use of force, crisis intervention, search and seizure, and you've passed these tests. Why are you still in this consent decree? Now, for us, that's not necessarily a question that we can answer, but we are absolutely committed to the work no matter where it stands. So when we look at this, it's the consent decree, I wouldn't say affects or impacts the daily operation of the Division of Police. It doesn't impact the work that they do. It's not going to change anything, our policies, whether or not it's in existence or not. Our policies are our policies. Our accountability systems are just that. And those things aren't changing. But this label that the division is under a consent decree is just something that's continued to have a negative impact.
Why is that? Why does it have a negative impact just existing under the consent decree?
Well, when I look at the morale of the officers, when I look at how this is, constantly this label that's put on them. And I try to explain to them, this doesn't impact you. The consent decree does not affect your daily work. It's just something that is in existence that the city is working with the monitors, and the city is working with the Department of Justice, and we are implementing best practices in policing. And when we do that, it doesn't impact what they're doing on a daily basis. The policies that we have in place are best practices that other agencies look to, when they are creating their own policies. And it's just this label that's in existence of, the Cleveland police can't police themselves. They have to have federal oversight. And I don't, my thoughts are, it doesn't impact their work. And I just, I don't know why it's such a harsh label for them, but it's still, it still exists. And it's still, some don't want to come to the Division of Police because they know, they hear this, they're under federal oversight. And I try to ingrain into everybody that this doesn't impact you, but it's more powerful than I can even fight.
Thank you for sharing that from the police personnel's perspective. Lee, I'll ask you as the leader of the police accountability team to kind of respond to some of that there. What about the morale of the community? What about the perception of the community, feeling like they're seeing accountability for harms done?
Yes. So one of the things that I'd like to start out by saying is that the consent decree, we accomplish what the consent decree sought to remedy. And I think that that's important because one of the things that is really important to the community, as Matt pointed out, is accountability, right? So one of the things that I did proactively, even before the motion, was gone to the Department of Justice, their COPS office, and we were awarded technical assistance to actually assist us with our accountability program and the accountability system, right? So we're going to look for overlaps. We're going to look for process gaps. We're going to look for recommendations on how to make it better. This is something that I have shared with each of the accountability partners. And I think that it's important to also note that the community is supposed to go along with us on this journey. No one should be left behind. And that is a commitment that I made from day one. And it is something that I will continue to be committed to.
Matt, I'll ask you about this. You've been reporting about this for a long time. I think the most recent report, please correct me if I'm wrong, was Mayor Justin Bibb saying that the consent decree was about 70% goals met. Definitely not 100%. He had acknowledged there's work to be done. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of the goals that have not been met? Can you kind of lay that out for us?
I think that there would be three main categories, and correct me if I'm wrong, that are still outstanding. And those would be, there's something called CPOP, which is like the new version of community engagement, called community problem-oriented policing. Yes, and so it's the idea that there should be sort of a give and take between police and the community, and community brings the problems in their neighborhoods to police officers, and that should kind of directly impact how those neighborhoods are policed, and officers should be seeking to kind of address the problems that are brought to them by community members. And that is something that there was still quite a bit of work to be done. There was a reach out to the Department of Justice by the city for consulting help about how to set up that program. And so that's a big one. And that is, there is kind of maybe the loftier goal of the consent decree is to create like a real feeling of community trust, between civilians and the police department. And that was maybe the dream of the consent decree. And that's a hard thing to measure. When you talk about community, what exactly is that? Who are you talking about? And there'll always be people who feel like the police department is out to get them. And some of them, because they've been committing crimes. Other people, maybe it's because they live in the wrong neighborhood, or a neighborhood that, feels that way in their interaction with the police department. So, getting to that point where they had created that community trust, I think, and from the beginning, you saw this when Law Director Mark Griffin in 2022, right after Mayor Bibb had come into the office, got up and said, tell us what we need to do, what measurements we need to meet to complete the consent decree. If you're telling us to meet some goal like this community trust that we can't really measure, it's not really fair to us because this could just go on forever. And I mean, I think that's always been an outstanding kind of issue with the consent decree. And then there is, the disciplinary system, which has kind of a long-standing issue with unfairness, whether it's coming down too hard on certain officers or being too lenient on other officers based on kind of internal politics. And then we're concerned about supervision, about whether promotions were being made, what the standards were for promotions, how much the kind of things in the consent decree that they wanted the department to focus on, how much those were being taken into account in promotions. And so those were, some big areas of the consent decree that were not fully addressed.
We have an email now from Jason. Jason writes in, the consent decree revolves around reformation, the same goal as policing and incarceration. I think it's important for the powers that be to be held to the same level of accountability as they would have their inmates. If the goals set forth by the consent decree haven't been met, why should the department get early release? We'll address that question from Jason. And Shireen, I want to give you an opportunity. A lot has been said here. Can you share with us from the Community Policing Commission perspective and from your perspective how you're feeling about the things that are being said right now?
I'll start by saying I agree with Chief Todd that we have amazing officers in Cleveland, and they're doing awesome work on the ground. But the reality is, this isn't just something that's happening with the city of Cleveland and the DOJ. We have a consent decree for a reason. In 2012, Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams were murdered. In 2014, Tamir Rice was murdered. There was a pattern that was uncovered. And since 2015, the city has failed to meet the standards to get us out of the consent decree. That is the real answer for why we are still here today. If you want to understand what's still unfinished in the consent decree, residents, people in the public, they have to look at the federal monitor's reports. There's still audits and assessments that are planned, as Matt suggested, that need to be done for us to really understand where we are. In that report at the top, it says the report basically reviews the checked boxes that have technically been checked, but it doesn't account for attitude or cultural change, the real deep constitutional policing that we want to see. There's no way to gauge that unless these assessments are done. I don't believe that we should just accept the checked boxes without understanding if they are fully operational. And it has been proven that after a lot of cities come out of these consent decrees, there's huge backslides in reform. So I believe that we would need to make sure that our existing local oversight structure is fully supported, funded, and operational before we get out of this.
I want to read an email now that came in early this morning from Todd. Todd writes, let's remember that this decree started because something about the culture at the Cleveland Police Department led to 137 police gunshots at an unarmed vehicle and the shooting of a child with a cap gun at a park, referring to the killing of Tamir Rice. Tom goes on to say, to remove the consent decree is to declare that the culture within CPD, which led to those incidents, has been reformed and that a culture of accountability has replaced it. Has that happened, Chief Todd?
So I think that what we're kind of missing here is we're not saying the work is over. The Mayor Justin Bibb is committed to police reform and to police accountability. The difference right now is he's asking for that to be internal to the city and to our residents instead of continuing to pay, I think it's been $40 million that's been paid over the life of this consent decree so far. And it's, when we talk about who's doing that work, it's not done here locally. We are bringing in outside entities to pass judgment on the Division of Police when we are still committed to the work, we're still committed to the change, but the ask is that that be done at the local level.
We have a call now from Todd in Ward 1. Todd, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Stephanie, Annie, Sharina Lee, and Matt. So that was my question. What's that 40 million over the last 10 years? What does that break down to an annual cost? And is there a projected cost for this year to the taxpayer for this? I also would like to know if your intention, in part, is to improve community relations with the public. How do you measure that if the public's not responding well in their outreach to the police department? And then my final question is, what will really be the harm, separate from the cost, to extend it a little bit longer so that you can get more police officers on the force to give a balance of the measurement that you need between them and the public?
Lee, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Todd. I think first, if I could go back a little bit, I think that this decision, for example, the Community Police Commission is also mentioned in the consent decree, right? And so they're also assessed by the independent monitor for what needs to be done to be able to reach those goals, right? And so this is something that I envision us all being in together. So one of the things that I wanted to sort of go back to was this idea that it's a political decision, and in my sort of policy brain, I think more apolitical, because when the executive order came out from President Trump, as Matt mentioned, right, that was not the immediate push to move forward. We waited until we had 7 assessments. Prior to 2025, we had 0 assessments completed. And so now we've had 7 assessments completed, including search and seizure, crisis intervention, and use of force, training, recruitment and hiring, staffing. And what I think is important is that we're not saying that we want to continue on with an administration that, as Sharina mentioned, may not have the most favorable view by the community. What we're saying is we want to bring that home, right? And so to continue to be having, to continue to have oversight by an agency or by a government that others feel are being harmful sort of takes us to a place where the mayor is saying, let's bring it back home. Let's all talk about this. How can we move to make this forward and move forward? Now, the goal, I think, of the money that is being spent is to repurpose some of those funds. So as I said, it is a hefty cost to taxpayers. And there are some that are very upset about the cost. It's something that I've never griped about because I think that it's something that we look at investments. But a lot of the local media and the community has been upset about the cost. And so one of the things that we want to also talk about is this assistance that we are reaching out for from DOJ is free, right? So we were awarded the technical assistance. And as far as CPOP, I think that it's important to also mention that Todd talked a little bit about community engagement. So we have our district policing committees meetings that meet once a month. We also have the CPC, which has meetings and opportunities for the public to come and give input on policies and training. We also have where we go out to roll calls, right? My team also does ride-alongs with police officers. We also go to community meetings. And I just want to say that there are opportunities for engagement where we can all figure this out together.
Chief Ton, I'll ask you to address the point of what the harm would be in extending the consent decree.
I think the biggest fear I have right now is people are focusing on checking boxes and not the work. And assessments are great. It validates the work that's been done. But I think we need to just focus on the work and the continued progress as opposed to checking the 300-something odd paragraphs of a consent decree that was written 10 years ago. And how do we move forward with best practice in policing in 2026? And that's why we're asking that, we believe that this is better sourced if it was brought home.
Matt?
So there are a lot of points in there. I mean, first, and I think that this is one of the things that I'll really be watching, because I assume that, before the end of the year, the Judge Oliver is probably going to rule to end the consent decree because it can't really go on if both sides, the Justice Department and the city, want it to end. And I think one thing that I'll be watching is, there was some discussion of the budget. for the consent decree. And what the city has done every year is put a lot of things that are kind of the reforms. So they've put CIT, the Crisis Intervention Specialized Officers, into the part of the budget that's the consent decree. They've put, certain other personnel, some of the, I guess there's part of the training, the recruitment budget that has gone into that section. And so I wonder, what exactly is going to get eliminated if you say that all the money that is going towards the consent decree right now is what's being eliminated, that would include a lot of things that were supposed to or thought of as maybe permanent reforms, and are all those going to be gone? I also think there was another moment in that hearing that I think was pretty telling. The monitor brought up that in their investigation of a search and seizure, there were a lot more traffic stops and searches of black drivers. And, they said that doesn't necessarily mean that there is bias among police officers, but it is a concern that they were hoping for the city to address. And what the monitor, Christine Cole, said is that they hadn't really gotten an answer about how that would be addressed. And so I think going forward, when there's public reporting, when there is kind of information coming from the police department, who is going to require them to kind of follow up and to be held accountable for what's in that report if there's no longer this court oversight of, actually fixing the problems that they find?
We have a call now from Kareem, who is a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter chapter here in Cleveland. Kareem, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I was calling or reaching out because interesting that we hear mentioned that it should be changed from the inside, when in actuality what we've seen up to this point has been a very slow and reluctant crawl to actually conform to what the DOJ has been asking. And with that understood, it's quite, I guess people would just kind of look at it like a person who perhaps is suffering from alcoholism, when, you have to admit that you have a problem before you could actually address the problem and feel that you're getting it right. And what we've seen up to this point has not been that. It has not been the accountability. And so what I'm hoping for is that while I don't want to see the city just go further in debt paying for the monitors, but we also need to see real committed change. And I think that starts with admitting that there was a problem, and we've yet to actually have that from the city. Instead, we have the same people that are training these officers that are coming in, that have been a part of the problem, that have never admitted that there is a problem. And so I believe that there's a bit of disingenuousness with regards to the desire to reform themselves. It's like the fox, going to reform other foxes from, with regards to not invading the hen house.
Kareem, thank you very much for calling in. We appreciate it. Chief Todd, I want to give you an opportunity to address some of those concerns there.
So there's a few different points that I want to make sure that I cover. One is that there has been absolutely no denial of accountability on behalf of the Division of Police, and that there was a need for structured change from our men and women. When we look at a lack of progress throughout the consent decree, I have to disagree a bit. The work was absolutely done. The difference is a lot of that was internal. And back in 2022, Mayor Bibb saw that there was what he observed, it seemed to be a lack of progress. But when this was started, it was just division members who were a part of the implementation of the training and the policies. So he brought on Dr. Anderson in 2022, and she was that one who helped us go through each paragraph and have a better understanding. And since she has come and joined our team, and since this has become an all of government approach instead of a division of police a project on our own, this is when we were able to report out the changes that we had made that we didn't even realize we had done. There was a lot of work that had been done. It was never recorded to the monitors properly and never identified in the semi-annual reports. Dr. Anderson and her police accountability team have been able to help us decipher each paragraph and talk about that change. And as far as accountability from our structure and our training staff are not the same ones that were here 10 years ago. You know, this is a new division of police. This is a new command staff within the division of police. And I make it very clear to our men and women that accountability starts at the top. It's not a bottom-up approach. It starts from the top down. And this is, you know, I want people to understand that our work is not done. You know, I have tried to make that very clear, but we are committed to this change, and we have the guidance from Dr. Anderson. We work in partnership with the Cleveland Police Commission, the Office of Professional Standards. So it doesn't take away the work that's been done and the progress that will keep moving forward.
I wish we had more time to continue this conversation. Unfortunately, we'll have to stop it there for today. We will be continuing to follow this story. As we know, it will ultimately be up to the judge what happens with the consent decree, and our reporter, Matt, will continue to follow the story. So I want to thank our panel for being with us today. Sharina Zayed from the Cleveland Community Police Commission, thanks for your time. Thank you. Dr. Lee Anderson from the city's Cleveland Police Accountability Team. Thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you.
And Cleveland Police Chief Annie Todd, thank you for your time.
Thank you for the conversation.
Matthew Richmond from IdeaStream Public Media, we appreciate it.
Great to be here.
We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we'll talk with the author of a new book about the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II, and in particular, the ones who never returned from combat. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll be right back. You're with The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for staying with us. More than 1 million Black Americans served in the U.S. military during World War II, despite the armed forces not being desegregated until several years after the conflict ended. Among those service members were the Tuskegee Airmen, the first African American military aviators in the history of the armed forces. They were renowned for their combat skills, but still faced terrible racial discrimination while serving their country. A new book looks at the lives and legacy of 27 of those airmen who were lost in battle and the questions their friends and families were left with once the war was over. Forgotten Souls, The Search for the Lost Tuskegee Airmen is out now, and the author, longtime NPR investigative journalist Cheryl W. Thompson, joins us now. Cheryl, welcome to The Sound of Ideas.
Good morning, Steph. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you calling in today. If you would like to call in to be part of the conversation, you can call us at 866-578-0903 if you have a question or a comment for Cheryl. Maybe you have a family story you'd like to share. And you can also email us at soi@ideastream.org or message us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Cheryl, can we start off with some background on the Tuskegee Airmen, how many there were, and what they did during World War II?
Sure. Well, there were more than 14,000. I think people often think that they were just pilots, but there were also women, and there were staff support and mechanics, and it was just, there were just a lot of them. And there were 355 of them who flew over in Europe. And of those, and my dad was a Tuskegee Airman as well, which was sort of, one of the interesting things for me about this.
Sure. And you talked about how that kind of informed the story. Can you talk to us about how you sort of walked that line between investigative journalist and daughter as you were working on this project?
Yeah, somebody asked me that the other day. I was speaking somewhere, and that question came up. And it's like I'm always, if I'm on a story, I am forever the reporter first. And it wasn't difficult because There were some things though that I did cross the daughter line into, and that was when I was talking to and meeting with the families. It's like I kept thinking, like, what would my dad? Did my dad know these people? Did he have a relationship with some of these men? Those were the kinds of things that I think sort of crossed into the daughter line. But for the most part, it was just like, I'm the reporter. Let me figure out this story and do it as a journal from a journalistic point of view.
In that journalistic perspective, you did hear a lot of stories about the kind of the pushback that the Tuskegee Airmen received, despite the great service that they were doing for the country. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, absolutely. They just were not wanted. They were not wanted in the military at that time, and they certainly were not wanted as pilots, right? It took the efforts of the black press, particularly in Pittsburgh, and the NAACP and the National Urban League to force the government to start this program, this cadet pilot training program, to get them in the military. And the irony was that when the black press and the organizations were pushing, they weren't pushing for a segregated military. They wanted these men to be instrumental in whatever the rest of the military was doing. But as it turns out, they absolutely were still segregated in the military. They built a base for them in Alabama. It was strictly for the black pilots.
You actually visited the air base where these men were trained, and now the property owner there is Mr. Slauson. When you talked with Mr. Slauson, he said, quote, "You took your life into your own hands if you went into town. The Bubbas didn't want them." So can you tell us a little bit more about your experience talking with Mr. Slauson and the hostility that he described?
Yeah, ironically, I saw him. I was in Tuskegee a couple of weeks ago speaking when the book came out, and I invited him, and he showed up. He's sort of an interesting guy because he is, if you had to guess, and I think I say this in the book, that he is sort of this, stereotypical Bubba, if you will. But I got to tell you, once I got to know him, he knew more about the Tuskegee Airmen and what went on there than most people. But basically, what he was saying was, even though Tuskegee had a large black population, it was run by the whites. And it was the Deep South, and it was Jim Crow era South. And they just did not want these black men coming into town. And I know on more than one occasion, General Benjamin O. Davis Jr., who commanded those troops, had to go into town and sort of rescue the guys sometimes.
I want to remind our audience we are talking with Cheryl Thompson. She is the author of a new book, Forgotten Souls, The Search for the Lost Tuskegee Airmen, about the brave pilots, many of whom, 27 of which, did not return from battle in World War II. And Cheryl, you had the opportunity to talk to some surviving Tuskegee Airmen. How did they react when you reached out about the book to have a conversation?
Yeah, so when I started the book in 21, there were 7 of them who had flown in Europe who were still alive. And so I reached out. I talked to 5 of them. 2 of them weren't well. And I talked to the daughter of one. But they were, I find that not only were these pilots, these airmen, these guys really receptive, but so were the families. It was almost as though they were waiting for someone to reach out to them so they could have their stories told. But the airmen were always receptive to journalists and telling their story. They just loved to talk about that time in their lives because by the time I reached out to them, they were all nearing the century mark. One, General McGee, Charles McGee, was actually 101 when I met with him at his home. He lived outside of Washington, and so they were always happy to tell their stories. But what I found most interesting about these men, well, besides what they went through, was that they remembered these stories. They remembered how badly sometimes they were treated. They remembered things as though it happened yesterday, as opposed to 7 decades ago, which to me sent the message that even though they survived and they thrived and they all went on to be successful, it still haunted them. They never forgot how they were treated.
I want to mention some of the names that you specifically thank in the book. You mentioned Brigadier General Charles McGee, also First Lieutenant William Rice, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Brown, Lieutenant Harry Stewart, and Lieutenant Colonel George Hardy, of the people that you mentioned, the surviving Tuskegee Airmen that you were able to have conversations with. And you started the book with the story of meeting a family of one of the airmen. What was it like reaching out to the families of these pilots?
So, the one thing because I didn't know them, they didn't know me. I knew some of the stories of the pilots just through research, but I didn't know anything about these families. I didn't know whether these pilots had wives or children or siblings. It took research, but the one thing I said every time I reached out to one was, here's who I am. I'm a reporter. I'm doing this book, but my dad was an airman as well, and I think that really helped. I think it helped sort of make them feel more comfortable. They were all receptive. Everyone I reached out to was receptive. And it's funny, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Brown last lived in Ohio, was where he lived. He was from, I believe he was from Minnesota, and I'm not sure he was the one from Minnesota, but he lived in Ohio. That I'm certain of. And they were just welcoming. It took some were more welcoming than others in that, they opened up easier than others did. And there was a family in New York, if that's the one you're talking about, on Long Island, lieutenant, whose family, he had two sisters who were still alive at the time. There were 13 of them, and he had two sisters. One actually was an older sister who became the first Black Army nurse after President Harry Truman desegregated the military. She was the first, and so she was still alive at the time. She not too long ago died at 104. And I met with her and her baby sister, who's 92. I met with them in New York, and they just, they had all these amazing stories, and they were happy to share. What I found interesting, too, with these conversations was that some of these relatives actually kept, I think they were handed down. There were letters, handwritten letters from a lot of these pilots that really helped tell their story and who they were. For instance, one of my favorite letters was from a pilot asking. He had sent the letter to his girlfriend's parents asking for her hand, and he wanted their permission. And it was just this lovely, lovely letter. And you could tell by reading it that he was really nervous, about it all. And that was one of my favorites. And the other was a woman in Florida, a sister of one of the airmen. And it's so funny because she was one of the first people I reached out to. And she was one I had to pull information out of every time we talked. She just, she wasn't used to a reporter. She just wasn't used to telling these stories. And so over time, she became a little more comfortable. And finally, I said to her, do you think I could come visit you? She lives in Florida, and she says, well, yeah, I guess. She was just so not into this, right? So I asked her, I said, it would be great if you could pull any letters, any photos, any newspaper clippings, whatever you might have that would help me tell your brother's story. She says, well, okay, I'll check, but I'm not sure, I'm just not sure that I have much. So I go to hop on a flight, get to Florida, go to the home. She was living in the home that her parents bought in 1923. She was divorced and, elderly woman, but very, very spunky, for 90 something. And I get there and she takes me into one of the rooms, and there's this coffee table, and on this coffee table is all of these documents and photos. And I'm thinking to myself, how many times have I talked to you? And you told me about none of this. And so, which is why I tell my students, I'm a professor at George Washington University. I tell my journalism students, there's always a place to go, right? And so as I was going through the records, I saw these two letters that the brother had written home. And in the letters, he talked about these two men. And he only called them by their first name, and one ended up as a doctor, and I think the other became a dentist. And so I asked her, I said, who were these men that he mentions in his letters? And she said, they were his best friends growing up. They lived around the corner. Their dad was the pastor of the local, the church in the neighborhood. And I asked her, I said, what was their last name? And she said, Shirley. And she says, oh, yeah, and by the way, there was a third brother. And she said, he was a pianist. And I think they wrote a book about him. And so I'm sitting there listening to them. I'm like, wait a minute, Shirley. And I said, what was the brother's name? And she said, Don. I said, Don Shirley, as in the Oscar-winning movie Green Book, about the pianist who, hired this racist guy to drive him
Wow.
through the South. And she looked at me and she went, uh-huh.
Wow.
I just thought, you never know.
never-
Never know who these people are.
Absolutely. And thanks to this book, we will get a little bit of insight into that. Cheryl Thompson, NPR investigative correspondent and author of Forgotten Souls, The Search for the Lost Tuskegee Airmen. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. That'll wrap up today's show. If you missed any part of it, you can hear a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU. You can get every episode of The Sound of Ideas wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. To get the last word on today's topics, you can email us at soi@ideastream.org or leave us a comment on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Yesterday, we shared the hour-long version of our live community tour event on artificial intelligence and how it's being used in Northeast Ohio. Monique wrote in that her takeaway from the panel conversation was, there are dangers, but also opportunities surrounding AI, opportunities in all caps. Thank you for writing in, Monique. And Tiffany from Cleveland posed the question, how do we ensure that AI models are bound by ethics? There are well-publicized issues with Grok that seem to be persisting even with additional restrictions. If they're continually fed biased, unethical, or evil prompts, how do we undo that damage? Thanks for sharing the thought with us, Tiffany. Remember, our next community tour is next week on March 4th, where we'll be talking about the future of Burke Lakefront Airport at the airport. Entry and parking are free. You just need to register to join our live studio audience. You can do that at ideastream.org/SOI. Tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas, we're analyzing President Donald Trump's State of the Union address with people from both sides of the aisle. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for keeping the conversation going. We'll see you back here tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas.